The certified letter landed like a hammer. $50,000 in damn penalties, 30 days to comply. Threat of lien if I didn't. Out past the tree line, the small stone and timber spillway I had rebuilt held a quiet oval of water that kept spring storms from chewing the creek ragged. On paper, the HOA called it a hazard. On the plat, the watercourse ran with my deed. I photographed every stake, every culvert, every rusted grate on their side of the fence, and waited. When the county posted the order and I pulled the boards, the water obeyed physics, not newsletters. What failed next wasn't my land. It was their plan. Like and subscribe for HOA stories where evidence, not newsletters, decides the outcome. I bought the place because of the creek. In summer, it was a ribbon of mirrors through switchgrass. In winter, it stitched frost to the cattails and made the air taste clean. The cabin sat on the upslope. A porch angled to watch the bend where deer cut a path to drink. The subdivision started where the pasture ended. Monuments. Rules about shutters and walking trails tracing the lowest ground. Our plat lines met at the water, a boundary the land never argued. The first months were work dressed as meditation. I cleared trash from the banks, set willow cuttings, and rebuilt an old, low weir that had collapsed decades. Ago, a few courses of stone keyed, into clay with a simple timber sill to spread flows and hold back. A shallow sheet. It wasn't a beaver fortress. It was a small hand on the creek's shoulder telling it to slow down. The ponded water turned a scar of eroded ditch into a wetland again. Blue heron approved with silence. Frogs wrote their own statistics. The HOA mostly lived in envelopes. Holiday banners, reminders about mailbox paint, polite notices about community, aesthetics. Then a new board arrived with certainty and a drone. An email with an aerial photo described an unauthorized dam and a threat to downstream assets. Downstream assets meant their walking trail, poured too low years ago, alongside an undersized culvert that clogged every leaf fall. I sent back deeds and the stormwater plan from the county website. The creek and its banks sat inside my parcel. The HOA had no easement beyond their side. I documented everything, the missing trash rack on their culvert, the way the trail subsided each spring, the silt delta forming from their own eroding swale. The replies hardened. Fines outlined in red. Talk of liens. Phrases like irrevocable, harm. A certified envelope set the amount at $50,000 and a deadline for removal. I learned early that water respects two things, gravity and record books. I made a folder for both and waited for the next page to turn. The inspection began with boots and clipboards at the property line, one set from the HOA and one from the county. The HOA rep spoke in metrics that sounded important to people who never stand in mud. The county engineer stood quietly longer than anyone else and traced silt. Fingers with his boot where the HOAs. Swales should have spread flow but had instead carved a rut. He noted the missing bar screen on their culvert. The trail poured tight to the inlet, the way cattails grew thick only on my side where the water slowed and dropped its burden. The board's letter arrived the next morning anyway, escalating the fine and setting a removal date. A neighbor forwarded the newsletter calling my structure a private reservoir and promising a safer, drier trail after compliance. I tightened my documentation. Drone stills of their clogged inlet during back-to-back storms. Time-lapse of the weir bleeding off peak flows across the whole sill, not tearing through one point like a knife. I walked the fence and photographed water lines on their concrete, high where they had no slack to give. 7 days out, the HOA posted bright plastic signs at the trail. Improvement work scheduled. The irony sat like a stone in a pocket. I called the county engineer, who said the weir predated his tenure and had likely prevented worse scouring. The order to remove would stand because of the complaint and because the structure lacked a permit on record. Sometimes procedures cannot ask the right questions in time. He recommended documenting removal carefully, saving every board, every bolt, noting flows and standing back. The morning I pulled the timbers, the sky had the hard shine of weather on the move. I loosened the wedges, lifted each board, and set them on the bank like bones. The pond sighed forward. Not a wall, but a curtain opening across the width of the channel. Water slid over clay polished by years of patience and found the cut made by decades of neglect downstream. Within minutes, the creek concentrated into the old incision and walked back toward the culvert that had no great-to-sift branches. It met the trail poured, inches lower than the floodplain, and did what water does when design asks for miracles. It took a shortcut. On my camera, the timestamp marked the first sheet of water tipping onto their path. Within 20 minutes, the inlet drowned. The swale upstream filled, and the HOA's new mulch islands began to raft. People are loud when they want credit. Water is loud when someone miscalculates. My phone lit with messages ranging from taunts to warnings. I stayed on my bank, logged rainfall from the gauge in my post, and watched the heron leave before panic, which made the air taste like metal. By afternoon, the HOA blasted an email blaming my reckless demolition for a flooded amenity and pooling in 2 basements beyond the trail. The accusation sounded like thunder to someone who hadn't watched the stormwater plan 100 times in slow motion. The county arrived before evening and took out a tape the way surgeons took a pulse. He measured invert elevations, shot grades with a level, and asked to see my folder. I handed it over with its neat tabs. Plat, storm plan, culvert details, prior photos of the trail's subsidence, video of the culvert choking on leaves last fall while the ponded water buffered the spike. He nodded once at the board member who said fines would continue daily until full restoration. 3 nights later, a line of storms marched across the radar like a chain. With the weir gone, the creek ran like it had in the old aerials, quick, narrow, merciless to the path that had stolen its space. The trail vanished twice in 1 hour. The inlet gulped and failed, and the HOA sent a second accusation laced with words they hoped the county would repeat. The engineer replied with a request for their trail design, as-built elevations and maintenance logs. Silence lasted longer than the storm. What broke it was a photo of their maintenance crew fishing a broken pallet from the culvert. Mouth at dawn. The next envelope bore the county seal and the word meeting. The conference room at the county building held more gravity than any HOA clubhouse. Blueprints from 15 years. Ego lay under a desk lamp, the original stormwater plan. The developer submitted, the one with a wider swale and a culvert set deeper, with a trash rack and a secondary spill path away from the trail. The as-built survey, filed years after, told a different story. Trail poured too low, culvert lip higher than designed, and the trash rack removed soon after installation. To prevent debris accumulation, which was the point of the rack, the county engineer spoke in the neutral grammar of compliance and consequences. He traced the designed path of water with a pencil, then traced the path it had taken after the weir came out and the rains returned. He pointed to my parcel and the lack of any easement obligating detention. He pointed to the HOA's common area and the maintenance, responsibilities they had accepted with their declarations. Fines on my side had been based on a complaint. The removal order had followed procedure. The outcome had exposed failures that did not belong to me. The board attempted to reframe private dam, reckless behavior, neighborhood harm. The engineer slid a photo across the table, their culvert mouth in October. Choked with maple leaves, trail edge spalled where water had licked it for seasons. He set beside it a still from my video. The weir bleeding flows in a smooth sheet while their inlet drowned under the pile. Then the report, grading outside of plan, lack of maintenance logs for 3 years, evidence of a fill berm placed years ago to keep the trail drier that had pinched the floodplain until the water had nowhere to rest. He recommended, and the county adopted, a corrective action plan, reconstruct the swale to design grade, reinstall a debris rack, lower the trail segment or elevate it on boardwalk where it crossed the floodplain, restore native vegetation to stabilize banks, and rescind the fine issued to me, acknowledging that my structure had been functioning as an informal attenuation that the as-built path could not replace. An additional line required the HOA to institute a maintenance log with quarterly inspections and to notify the county before any future changes near the creek. I left with a copy of the plan, and the fine marked rescinded. The HOA board left with a binder, full of homework and a silence that sounded like a trail learning its place. Work began before the leaves turned. Excavators carved the swale back to the width shown on paper, not the narrow trench the mower had preferred. A crew set a new culvert with the invert where it belonged, and bolted on a debris rack that would irritate people who didn't like cleaning until they liked dry paths more. Carpentry lifted the worst trail segment onto a simple boardwalk that could shrug when the creek wanted to, breathe beyond its banks. Live stakes went in along edges, and choir logs knitted the toe where high water could nibble. The heron returned and gave no comment. On my side, I left the stones stacked, like a jawline next to the channel, and let the wetland find a compromise with the new downstream capacity. I planted more willow where the current pinched after removal and watched water lines mark the bank with a new equilibrium. I kept my folder of evidence because record books still matter when memories get loud. The HOA removed the newsletter post about the private reservoir and replaced it with a terse notice about trail improvements funded from reserves. They did not apologize in print. They did send a neutral letter, rescinding the lien threat and acknowledging the county's findings. For this kind of diplomacy, neutrality is enough. Neighbors who had forwarded complaints sent quieter messages this time. Some asked how to read a plat, where to find a stormwater plan, and how to recognize when policy is leaning too hard on hope. A couple thanked me for not letting anger outrun proof. I told them the creek had done most of the teaching. The lesson that remains after the machines leave is older than any board. Water honors gravity in paper. It punishes wishful thinking poured in concrete. Associations exist to care for common ground, not to shift the cost of that care upstream. Fines can create noise that hides design flaws, but the first hard rain finds them. The next time an envelope arrives in your mailbox with numbers in red, ask 2 questions before panic gets a vote. What does the record say? And what does the land say? When those answers agree, everything else gets quieter. When they don't, it's time to let the creek speak. If this story helped you see HOA power plays more clearly, don't let it end here. Help someone else win with proof, not panic. Like this video to boost it in the algorithm, subscribe for more real HOA battles and smart wins, and share it with a neighbor who needs a blueprint. Drop your experience in the comments. What did your deed, easement, or storm plan reveal? Your lesson could be the reason someone else keeps their peace, their property, and their sanity.